Good morning, students. Now we'll be moving ahead in our chapter of the nationalism in Europe. So here we'll be talking about today. Our topic will be what did liberal nationalism stand for? So here, ideas of national unity in the early 19th century Europe was closely allied to the ideology of liberalism. The term liberalism derives from the Latin root liber, which means free. So here at that time in France, in Europe, what was the condition? The ideas of the national unity, like whenever they talked about this united thing, so only one thing was there in the mind of the people was the feeling of liberalism. Now, this word liberalism means what? It has been derived from this word liber, which means free. So liberalism is nothing but it is a kind of ideology which tells that everybody there wants to be free and they don't want it to be under any kind of autocratic rule, and all these privileges which had been given to these all these different states like nobles, clergy, so this should be taken away from there. And who was behind this thing? It was the new middle class which was emerging. So this ideology was their ideology. Now here, for the new middle class, liberalism stood for the freedom of the individual and equality for all before law. Now here, liberalism for this individual peoples, it was just freedom. But when we talk about this law, then law should be equal for all, and it should not be it should not be biased in terms of the king, or if in terms of a normal person. So law should be equal for each and everyone. Now, politically, it emphasizes the concept of government by consent. So, here you can see the point which are from political dimensions here. Here, the equality of law should be equal for everyone. Then, politically, it gave attention to the concept of government by consent. So, government should be made by the consent. So, consent of who? The consent should be of the people here. So, according to the people's consent, the government should be formed. Now, since the French Revolution, liberalism had stood for the end of autocracy and clerical privileges, a constitution and representative government through parliament. Okay, so here what they wanted, this liberalism had stood for the end of autocracy. So here the autocracy means the rules of this all this monarchy who was ruling over there. So this autocratic rule should be ended, and all this clerical privilege which were given to the clergies by birth should be taken away from them. So this was the meaning of liberalism according to them. Now, a constitution representative government through parliament should be formed. Means there should be a proper constitution according to which a country should be governed, and also the representative government should be made by the help of a parliament. So there will be definitely some people will be elected and chosen by the people, and they will be sitting there in the parliament, and they will be representing those people who have selected them. Now, 19th century liberals also stressed and the inviolability of the private property. So here they also stressed on the thing that if somebody is having a private property, so that should not be taken away from him. In earlier times, what happened, this king, suppose they like the property of any person, so they can straight away take from them. So they what they wanted actually is, if anybody is having some property, so he should have the right to have it always, like nobody should be able to take it away from them. So this what they wanted. Yet equality before the law did not necessarily stand for universal suffrage. So here this equality before law did not necessarily means that each and everybody will get the voting right. Here this word suffrage means the voting rights of the people. So here liberalization according to them, it was not like that everybody will be getting the voting rights like the women's at that time. They were not having any kind of voting right. They were considered to be living under the influence of their husbands and their families. So they were just treated like a minor status, just like a normal small boy or girl. So they were not given any kind of voting rights. You will recall this in the revolutionary France, which marked the first political experiment in the liberal democracy. The right to vote and to get elected was granted exclusively to the property owning men, men without property, and the women who were excluded from political rights only for a brief period. Under the Jacobean, did all the males enjoyed suffrage. Now here, if you recall this French Revolution chapter, you will come to know that everybody was not getting this voting right. It was granted to only those men who were holding some property. So only those people who are having property had a right to vote and select the representatives. And all these other men without property and women, they were completely excluded from this political right. They were not having any kind of right to vote. Now, under the Jacobean time period, when this Jacobean was formed under Maximilian Robespierre, so what happened at that time? It's a suffrage was given to everyone, but it was just for a limited time period. It was not a long time story. Only for a brief period under Jacobean did all the adult males enjoy suffrage. However, the Napoleonic Code went back to limited suffrage. Now what happened when this got ended? Also, this directory was formed, and this time again Napoleon came back. So Napoleonic Code was changing back everything. It went back to the limited suffrage. All these things which were changed earlier, it was completely again changed, or changes made by this Napoleonic Code. So here Napoleonic Code went back to the limited suffrage. So under Napoleon, again this right of vote has been taken away from the peoples, and reduced women to the status of a minor, subject to the authorities of farmers and husbands. So here fathers and husband are the thing which will always try to put this woman under pressure, and they act similarly, just whatever has been said by their fathers or husband. So these women are completely under their influence. So there was no voting right for this women here. Throughout the 19th and the early 20th century, women and non-propertied men organized opposition movements demanding equal political right. Now, all these unpropertied men and women, they were keep fighting for this equal opportunity for voting. And today, if you see that most of the countries are having such kind of right, where women and everybody who is above 18 years of age has got ability or right to vote. Okay, so here at that time it was not the case. So at that time they were just protesting and running some movements against such kind of things, so that they will also be getting chance to vote. Now in the economic sphere, liberalism stood for the freedom of market and the abolition of state imposed restriction. Now this part earlier, like all this Napoleonic Code and suffrage, all these things which you learnt, this was the political view, and now we are going to learn from the economic sphere. This point will be related to the economy somehow. So in under liberalism, what was the economic sphere? So here liberalism stood for the freedom of the markets and abolition of state imposed restriction on the movement of goods and capital. Now here what they wanted, that market should be free. So market should not be under any kind of influence, means all these taxes which were imposed, because this middle class were mostly doing in trading activity, so it was just like a lifeline for them. So they wanted the market to be free and without taxes, so that they can easily do the trade, because it was the only thing which has lifted them earlier, and in future also they wanted that thing to happen, so that each and every tax will be removed, then it will be much better opportunity for this middle class. So state imposed restriction should be removed, and so this will ensure the movement of the goods and capital freely. Now during the 19th century, this was a strong demand of the emerging middle class. So in the 19th century, this was the strong demand from the middle class. As I told you that this was just like a lifeline for them, and they were completely dependent on this thing. Now let us take the example of German speaking regions in the first half of the 19th century. Napoleon's administrative measure has created out of The countless small principalities with a confederation of 39 states. Each of these possesses its own currency. Now here we are taking the example of the Germany. Germany at that time it was Prussia. So here the principal confederation that was of 39 states. Now each of these states they possess their own currency. So it was the condition that each and every state was having their own currency and weight and measure X. A merchant traveling in 1833 from Hamburg to Nuremberg to sell his goods would have to had to pass through 11 custom barriers and pay a custom duty of about 5% at each one of them. So what was the problem? Suppose if a merchant is there, trader is there in 1833, he is traveling from Hamburg to Nuremberg to just to sell his goods. So he will have to cross the barriers, and on that barrier there will be 11 custom duties which will be charged, and it was every time it was 5% of the value of the good which has been taken. So it was like lot of sum of money which will be paid to these people in form of taxes. So this thing was a real problem. So the duties were often divided according to the weight and measure act of the goods. Okay, so how the duty will be imposed? Definitely it will be based on the goods, like how much you are taking. The problem is that every state was having its own currency and own system of weight and measure. So everywhere the measure was different. Let us learn about it. As each region has its own system of weights and measures, this involved time consuming calculation. Now this created a time consuming calculation, because every time they will have to calculate this thing, because the weight and measure was not uniform. The measure of the cloth, for example, was the LA. So LA was the measurement unit, like kg. So LA was also like in centimeters, so L was there, so which in each region stood for a different length. So this shows length. So length was different every time. An LA of textile material brought in Frankfurt would get you 54.7 centimeter of cloth. In Mainz it will be 55.1. In Nuremberg it will be 65.6 centimeter, and in Freiburg it will be 53.5 centimeter. So every time the taxes will also change, because the length is changing, and according to the change clothes length of the cloth, they will have to pay the taxes everywhere. Now such conditions were viewed as an obstacle to economic exchange and growth by the new commercial class. Now this new commercial class will be just completely shattered because of this thing, because every time this was like a big obstacle, a problem for them, that every time they will have to pay so much money to this people in form of taxes. So such conditions were viewed as obstacle to exchange and growth by the new commercial class, who argued for the creation of unified territory, allowing the unhindered movement of goods, people and capital. So here what they wanted, that all that they should make one uniform economic territory should be made, and so that the goods and all these people can move freely from one place to another, and there should be no paying of taxes by anyone. In 1834, a custom union or Zollverein was formed. Now this Zollverein was a trade union, was formed at the initiative of Prussia. Prussia was today it is known as Germany. At that time it was Prussia, and joined by the most of the German states. So now this trade union Zollverein was formed inside by this German states, and the union abolished tariff barriers and reduced the number of currency from over 30 to 2. So at that time in this state there were 30 currencies over there. So what they did, they reduced those 30 currency to 2 to bring this uniformity, so that trade can be done easily within the given two currencies. The creation of a network of railways further stimulated mobility, harnessing economic interest to the national unification. Now here the railway network was also created, so railway was also helping a lot in the mobility of these goods and services. Now, a wave of economic nationalism strengthened the wider nationalist sentiments growing at that time. So, all these things which were running in favor of them, so they just had this feeling of national sentiments growing at that time, that everybody wanted to be free, and all these things which were being changed, these changes which were being made, was somehow helping and just putting extra fire in the in the inside the people of getting this liberalism. Now, a new conservatism after 1815. Now here, following the defeat of the Napoleon in 1815. Now what happened in 1815? This Napoleon got defeated. The European government were driven by the spirit of conservatism. Conservatives believe that established national traditional institution of state and society like the monarchy, the church, social hierarchy, property and the family should be preserved. So what is after this defeat of this Napoleon, all this European government they were just driven by this spirit of conservatism. So what is conservatism? It is the thinking that all this monarchy which was the rule, like all these states were there, so all those things should be brought back again to a rule and should be restored and preserved. So this was the thinking of this European government at that time. Like the monarchy system should be brought back, the church should be there, social hierarchy like it was earlier, like the three states were there, so it will be like that, and the property will be owned by them, and the families, all their families, like the families of this all these kings and all, they should be preserved. Most conservatives, however, did not propose the return to the society of pre-revolutionary days. Now they never wanted the exactly the same situation, so they actually wanted that this should be restored, but with some changes. Okay, so they just don't want it to be it like pre-revolutionary date. They wanted some changes to happen. So rather they realized from these changes initiated by the Napoleon that modernization could in fact strengthen the tradition institution like monarchy. So what they realized, that whatever the changes which were brought by the Napoleons were good, and it was very good to modernize and strengthen the institution of the monarchy. So by doing and preserving all that and implementing the changes what Napoleon did, it will be good for them means monarch to be to get strengthened and become powerful. It could make state powerful or more effective and strong. A modern army, an efficient bureaucratic system, a dynamic economy, the abolition of the feudal and serfdom could strengthen the autocratic monarchy of the Europe. Now what they are saying here, that a modern army will definitely boost up the economy, because when the army will be there, definitely you will become strong. And the abolition of the feudal system should be abolished, and the serfdom could strengthen. So they were also focusing that all this feudal system and serfdom should be abolished, as this could strengthen this autocratic monarchies of the Europe. So they wanted this all these changes. In 1815, representative of the European wars, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. These were the entities which defeated Napoleon together. Who collectively defeated Napoleon met at Vienna. Now these all these Prussia, Britain, Russia, and Austria, they are meeting at Vienna. So why they are meeting over there? To drop the settlement for Europe. So they are going to do some settlement for their Europe, because as they have defeated, now they'll be meeting and they'll be doing some settlement for this whatever has been done by this uh, Napoleon in France. So how this settlement will be done? The Congress was hosted by the Austrian Chancellor Duke Metternich. Now this Congress, this Treaty of Vienna is also known as Vienna Congress. So this was hosted by the Austrian Chancellor Duke Metternich. So Duke Metternich, Duke means prince. So he was Prince of Austria. So in Vienna, this meeting was held. The delegates drew up the Treaty of Vienna. Now, Treaty of Vienna was like an agreement in 1815 with the objective of undoing most of the changes that had come about in Europe during the Napoleonic War. So they were about to do some changes which have been already came in the Europe during this Napoleonic War. So they wanted some change in it. So what they did here is the Bourbon dynasty, which had been disposed during the French Revolution, was restored to power. So at that time, if you recall this French Revolution chapter, the Bourbon dynasty was been removed, and it was the rule of somebody else. So here now it was restored back to power, means Bourbon dynasty, this Bourbon dynasty, so king has brought back to the power here. Then what happened? The France lost its territories it has annexed under the Napoleon. So all these areas which were been taken by this Napoleon was made free by all these Prussia, Russia, and all. Okay, so all the territories which has been won, so again these territories has been taken away here by Napoleon. Now they were free. Now a series of states were set up on the boundaries of the France to prevent French expansion in future. Now they thought that this could be dangerous, this France could be dangerous. So what they did, like suppose this is the area, or suppose this is a country. So what do you do? In between they will make a separate state, so that suppose this is France here and it wants to attack, so first attack will be done here, and then this country will come to know that France is doing something. So such kind of states were made on the border. Suppose one, again the country is there, so one small state will be here, again here it will be one small state, he will be here. So it will be like if France is doing any kind of activity of war, then in this case this country will come to know and they will be fighting against them. It was just simply done for getting some protection from France. Now, here, a series of states were set up to the boundaries of the France to prevent French expansion in future. So they don't want France to expand in future. Thus, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which included Belgium, was set up in the north, and Genoa was added to Piedmont. Now, what happened? This Kingdom of the Netherlands, which included Belgium, was been set up in the north, and Genoa was added to the Piedmont in the south. So all these areas were being added. Now Prussia was given important new territories on its western frontier. So where this Prussia got its areas in western frontiers, while Austria was given control of the northern Italy. So here Prussia got the western frontier and the Austria got the northern part of the Italy. They are actually just dividing these areas among them. Now, but the German But the German Confederation of 39 states that had been set up by Napoleon was left untouched. So this 39 states which was being set up by this Napoleon was left untouched, and there were no changes made in it. In the east, Russia was given part of Poland, while Prussia was given a portion of Saxony. Now Russia got some part of the Poland, and the Prussia or Germany today, which is known, was given some part of the Saxony. The main intention was to restore the monarchy that had been overthrown by the Napoleon and created a new conservative order in Europe. So again in these areas which had been set, so there was some person will be sit over there who will be ruling over there, and it will check everything, every activity of this France. So all this monarchy system which was been thrown by the Napoleon, now again this new conservatism which was happening in Europe and brought back the changes. So they restored all these monarchies. Now these conservative regimes set up in 1850s were autocratic. Autocratic means all these conservative, they did what they wanted to do and they will not listen to anyone. They did not tolerate criticism and dissent, sought to curb activities that questioned the legitimacy of autocratic government. So in this conservative regime of 1815, if they were just completely autocratic, they are not going to be criticized. If somebody is criticizing, then it will be a problem for them and they will be taking him away. Now the same thing, if any question somebody is raising question to the this autocratic government, then it was also not allowed. It was just like a censorship. So most of them imposed censorship laws to control what has said in the newspaper, books, plays and songs reflected the ideas of liberty and freedom. So in newspaper, books and songs, so if you're going to show or in anywhere where it will be reflected like the idea of liberty and freedom is there, so they all this kind you all these things you cannot do because the censorship was there. So you cannot do all this kind of activity. So it will be like that you are against this form of government, and this thing will be treated with some punishment. Associated with the French Revolution, the memory of the French Revolution nonetheless continued to inspire liberals. One of the major issues taken up by the liberal nationalists who criticized the new conservative orders was freedom of the press. Now here in the French Revolution, this freedom of the press was there. So it was just like all these things which were happening during this French Revolution. So it continuously it inspired the liberal that this thing should always be done. So if you are going to suppress someone or try to bring him down, so again this thing was just kind of revolutionary kind of thing, that that inspiration will come from within, that if they had done it, so we can also become liberal. So this feeling of nationalism was giving boost inside the heart of the peoples over there. So they started criticizing this conservative orders, and this freedom of press was there. According to, they were still printing some papers, and they were just criticizing all these things. So that's all for today. We'll be seeing, or I'll be seeing you in the next class. Thank you.